Hello everybody and welcome to another video. Today I'm doing a bit of a fun video. I've decided now that we're reaching the end of the year, I'm going to do a couple of more like end of the year sort of videos for this channel, and it's not really anything to do with Star Wars content that was released this year, but it is going to be about my experiences this year. And one thing I would like to do is ranking some of my favorite and my least favorite Star Wars books that I've read this year, and today I'm going to do my top 5 least favorites. Now before I get started, I do want to say that just because a book is on this list doesn't mean I necessarily disliked it. In fact, there's only one book on here that I would say I actually didn't really enjoy all that much. All the rest, I think, had some good parts, but overall just didn't appeal to me as much as many of the other books that I read this year. And of course, if you're thinking, oh, where's this book or whatever, there's only so much that I read this year. I would say this year I only read somewhere around 25 Star Wars books, something like that. So I didn't read a ton. There's plenty that I haven't read. However, out of what I have read, these would be my least favorites. And as far as the order, I'm going to be starting with the one out of these I liked the most, and then at the end is going to be the one that I liked the least. So starting off, number 5, the one out of these that I enjoyed the most, I would say, is Out of the Shadows by Justina Ireland, one of the High Republic books. This is the second young adult novel, I believe. It was released in Wave 2 of the first part of the High Republic. I can't remember how they're calling it. But yeah, it was released this summer. It was actually released on my birthday. Yeah, this one, to me, just was easily the least favorite of the High Republic books so far. I have enjoyed all of the other ones quite a lot. In fact, you will probably see at least a couple of them on my favorites list. But this one just didn't quite do it for me. It still had good characters. I think it had a pretty decent story, some interesting mystery and intrigue and stuff, but overall, it was just not one that I would consider an incredible book or anywhere near, I would say, the quality of the other three. It's still a good book for sure, but it just didn't do as much for me. Next one up is one of the more recent ones I've read. In fact, at this point, the most recent one that I have read, and that is the Lando Calrissian Adventures trilogy by L. Neil Smith. And this is actually a trilogy, and by the way, in this video and the other one that I'm going to do my favorites, I am including trilogies and series. In one or two cases, it's going to be an individual book from the series, but I am also including trilogies just because usually if I enjoy one book from a trilogy, I enjoy them all. Or in this case, if I think one is okay, then I think the rest are okay. But this is one that I did enjoy a decent amount of. I thought all three stories had something to offer, but again, just wasn't as interesting to me. But it had some cool parts and some cool new characters. I particularly enjoy the droid character. Overall, again, it's just not one that I enjoyed as much. Next one up is actually a bit of a surprise for me, considering this is one that I have actually read quite extensively in the past, but it is one that upon rereading it this year, I didn't enjoy as much as I once did. And that is the Old Republic Revan book by Drew Karpyshyn. Now this one I kind of struggle with because I really enjoy the first half of this book. I think the stuff with Revan and Canderous Ordo is really cool, and how this book kind of bridges the gap between the two Knights of the Old Republic games, and showing how Canderous becomes Mandalore by the time of KOTOR 2. And this book also follows Lord Scourge, who is a Sith character, and I think his story is pretty interesting. But the thing that really brings this book down for me, first of all, is the treatment of the story and characters of KOTOR. You guys probably know I'm a big KOTOR fan, and even though I didn't absolutely hate how it was done in this book, there were some things that I just wasn't really a fan of them doing, such as the treatment of Bastila. I thought she was not really that great in this book, as well as the exile, Meetra Surik. I thought wasn't really that interesting in this book. But the bigger issue I have with this book, it being a Revan book, you would expect it to be tied into, Knights of the Old Republic and stuff, which it is, but it's also a tie-in to the Old Republic MMO, which personally I am fine with. I haven't reread them yet. That I have not read them in a few years now, but the other three Old Republic books I think are quite good. So it tying into the MMO isn't the issue for me. The issue for me is that this tries to be both a sequel to the KOTOR games as well as a tie-in to the SWTOR game, or the Old Republic, if you prefer. And that's kind of where it really falters, because it tries to do both at once, and it doesn't really do either one of them successfully, in my opinion. So what is here is okay for the most part, but I just, as an Old Republic fan especially, but even taking that out of the picture, it's just not as successful as I think it really was trying to be. Next one up may be a bit of a surprise for some people considering who wrote it, but it is Choices of One by Timothy Zahn, who is one of, if not the most beloved Star Wars author to have ever written a Star Wars story, especially due to his original Thrawn trilogy, but he's written a lot of other good stuff too. This is one of the few books of his that I read this year, in addition to the Thrawn trilogy and Outbound Flight, and I believe that's it. But this one just didn't really do a whole lot for me. Again, not bad or anything, it was just kind of a very meh sort of book. I enjoyed my time with it well enough while I was reading it, but I could hardly tell you a single thing that happens in this book. It's probably, out of all of the books that I read this year, it is probably the biggest definition of a meh book to me. It's just an okay book that I enjoyed a decent amount, but it's not one that I'm like scrambling to reread or anything. But it's okay. It's got Mara Jade in it, which is pretty cool, and Thrawn and all this different stuff. But yeah, overall, just not really one that I enjoyed too much. And that brings us to the final book, or technically trilogy, that I'm going to be talking about. That is the Han Solo Adventures trilogy by Brian Daley. Now, I really wanted to love this trilogy because it did have some cool ideas, and it's about Han Solo, so I mean, you know, that speaks for itself. But in addition to that, these were some of the first Star Wars books ever published. In fact, prior to this trilogy, there were only two that were done, those being the novelization of the original Star Wars movie, as well as Splinter of the Mind's Eye, and then Han Solo at Star's End came out, which is the first book in this trilogy, and then Han Solo's Revenge came out, and then the novelization for The Empire Strikes Back came out, so 2/3 of this were done before Empire Strikes Back even came out, which is crazy. Then the third book in the trilogy came out. So these were very early Star Wars books. They were released in like 1979-ish, I think, 1979 and 1980, if I remember correctly. So they were really early, which was definitely a cool experience to read these, but I just didn't really care for any of these all that much. The only one I really found that interesting was the first book, At Star's End, but even that one was like an okay book to me. The other two, like the second book especially, Han Solo's Revenge, I could not tell you a single thing that happened in that book at all. Like, at least Choices of One, I can tell you, like, yeah, Mara Jade was cool and Thrawn was cool, and it had, you know, the original trilogy trio in it, and they were cool and all that stuff, and some other things here and there. The second book in this trilogy, I could not tell you even that much about. I do not remember a single thing about it. But overall, it's not a terrible trilogy. It still has some good moments here and there, but it's not one that I particularly enjoyed all that much. So that is pretty much it for this video. I will also be recording my top 10 favorite Star Wars books that I read this year, so do keep a lookout for that. But that is pretty much it for this video, so I'll see you guys next time.